I want to start this talk today by telling you about an email I got a couple of months ago from someone I met on Randy's speaking tour in Norway. This gentleman was asking a very serious question, and it took me a long time to figure out what to say to him. What he asked was, how can I best help spread the message and help people change their minds and join the side of reason? Every time I try, he said, I hit these obstacles. People are afraid of leaving their alternative views because they get meaning and comfort from them. It looks like we have nothing to replace the emptiness that they filled with pseudoscientific beliefs and nonsense. And I get accused of fanatically preaching another religion, that science is just another dogma. And I don't feel like I have the expertise I need to advocate for the cause. This last one is not true at all, by the way. This guy's a PhD. He's more prepared than most people to argue for a rational, naturalistic point of view. But he's frustrated because he feels like he's not winning these arguments. The frustration he's feeling, I think, is because he's trying to get people to accept reason by trying to reason with people who don't yet accept reason. And I think we've all had the experience of arguing with someone until you're blue in the face, even though your arguments are strong and theirs are very weak, or maybe don't even exist. They just won't listen to reason and you can't figure out why. Well, here's why. They don't listen to reason. That's not the language they speak. Trying to argue people into being more reasonable is a little like trying to convince a student of literature that mathematics is a better field while using only mathematical proofs to make your point. You're just not speaking their language. So to put this another way, reason is a fantastic tool for making great decisions, but we can't rely on it for changing minds. We know that because if simply being logically correct made an idea persuasive, there would be no wrong ideas left in the world, and they're everywhere. So how can we ever win with these people? I'm a skeptic and I'm an atheist, but my background is not in religion or in science or in education, so I'm not going to approach this from any of those perspectives. My background is in strategic communications, which is really the art and science of this question. How do we win? If you're trying to get a law passed, if you're trying to get a corporation to change its behavior, you're trying to help workers form a union or win a union election, you're trying to spark a revolution, the words that you choose and the values that you communicate will often determine whether you win or lose. You want to choose those words very carefully and deliberately and not leave it to chance. And the words that we're using and that we're used to using may not be doing what we think they're doing. So I want to talk about advancing science and critical thinking within that framework. I don't have the answer to how do we win. I don't believe there is one answer, but there are fixed questions that will get us there, and that's what I want to give you to think about today. These are the questions that are at the center of any strategic communications plan. We ask, what's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Who do we need to talk to accomplish that goal? What do we want them to do? What are we actually asking? What values do they hold that we can tap into? And what beliefs do they hold that will be obstacles to us getting through to them? Finally, based on our answers to those questions, what do we say? And who says it? Who is trusted to deliver the message? So first, what's our goal? The skeptics have a lot of different goals, and your tactics will be different depending on what you choose as your goal. We might one day want to mobilize public support to defeat an anti-science education bill, or we might want to energize and recruit people to join our organizations who already consider themselves to be skeptics. But the question this talk is about is how to persuade more people to have a naturalistic scientific worldview and fewer people to subscribe to supernatural and pseudoscientific beliefs. If we can figure out how to do that consistently, it's only a matter of time before we will control the entire world. Now we've got our goal, the next question is, who do we need to talk to? In grassroots organizing, when you're mobilizing a lot of people to take action on an issue, you divide them up into three basic groups. The people who support us already, the people who are firmly opposed to what we're doing, and the people who don't feel so strongly that their views are fixed. And the most important group that we want to talk to, if we really want to make more skeptics in the world, is the people whose views aren't firmly fixed, because our time and money are limited resources. When we're talking to each other or arguing in circles with entrenched opponents, we're not changing minds and we're not moving closer to our goal. If you want to change as many minds as you can, you should be spending most of your time talking to those people who are persuadable. Obviously, we also need to talk to people who support us. A main reason is that we need to keep them energized, we need to get them involved in our organization so that they too can go out and talk to people who are persuadable. But the goal here is to change minds and not only to find the people who already agree with you. That can feel like progress, but on the outside, from the external view, we're not actually gaining ground. It's also tempting to argue with people who are dead set against your goals and your worldview. It can make sense. It's fun because we're skeptics. We like to argue. We like logical fallacies, and we like pointing out when someone else does it. But unless people in that persuadable middle are listening and it's having an effect on them, it's not effective. That's a rare situation when that happens. It does happen. But I've seen canvassers on a petition drive, for example, argue with an opponent who is very entrenched for 10 minutes And during that time, 100 people who've walked past who probably would have signed the petition. And the other side does this very well. Mormons, for example, will stop knocking on your door if you tell them that you're a Catholic or an atheist, because millions of door knocks have told them that they are not able, except in an extreme minority of cases, to turn Catholics or atheists into Mormons. And they've got billions of dollars to spend on proselytizing. They've got an army of conscripted foot soldiers, but they still want to spend those resources wisely. The next question is, what do we want people to do when they hear from us? In a political election, this is very simple. We want them to vote for our candidate. In a grassroots campaign, we might be trying to get people to sign a boycott, or to sign a petition or join a boycott. We may not have right now in this talk a concrete action in mind for skepticism, but I bring this up to say that strategic communications most often focuses on changing people's behavior and what they do, rather than changing their values and how they think. Because it's very easy to change behavior, and it's almost impossible to change someone's values. It's very difficult. For example, people tend to oppose tax increases and vote against them. And if you want someone to vote for a tax increase, you don't try to convince them that tax increases are good. You tell them that the tax increase is going to fix the potholes on their street. So you don't have to convince them, to give up their belief that tax increases are bad, not to hate tax increases. They just have to hate potholes more. So you start with what they care about, and you give them reasons that matter to them. And they may or may not be reasons that matter to you, but they're reasons that are true, but they're reasons that appeal to them. If workers at a hospital are going on strike, and you want the community around the hospital to support the strike, you don't talk about how strikes are the most important tool that workers have to level the playing field with their employers, right? You talk about how the nurses are fighting for better staffing levels so that when patients go to the hospital, they know there's enough staff there to take care of them. And both of these things are true, but you get to decide what you talk about. And you don't have to get the public to support the idea of a strike. You just have to get them to support this strike. The point of this is, if what we really want to do is change hearts and minds and not just change behavior. The thing is that changing behavior does change minds. And it's one of the most effective things in changing minds, because it sets up a cognitive dissonance. And once you voted for one tax increase, it gets harder to maintain the belief that all tax increases are bad. And once you supported striking workers on a picket line, it gets harder to maintain the idea that union workers are lazy and selfish. So what does this mean for skeptics? It means that if we are trying to get superstitious people to think more critically, there is value in getting them to use scientific thinking in small ways that don't require them to give up their entire worldview and self-identity to do so. So the question that this gentleman emailed me was saying that he had people in his family, people that he really strongly wanted to convince, and it hurt him to think about them being consumed by these fallacies and these superstitions. And so however much we want to focus on the most persuadable people, many of us have people like that in our lives. And what I said to him is that when it seems like someone believes in every ridiculous thing, from homeopathy to guardian angels, it can be, the instinct is to say your whole worldview is screwed up. Everything you think is wrong. Like, the way you're approaching this is wrong. And that tends to make people dig in their heels, because people's identity is wrapped up in their worldview, the way people think about themselves. And you're asking people to give up a huge part of themselves in order to do that. So it may be better to accept that we can't change the entirety of who people are overnight. Back off for a while, and in this particular situation, instead present them with small individual examples of how scientific thinking can help them and is useful. If they're into homeopathy and they swear it works for them, if you come at them and say it's all in your head, it's a placebo, they hear that as, you're crazy, you don't know what you're experiencing, and that makes people very defensive. So find something they haven't used yet. Tell them that you saw a video on ear candling that proved that it was fake. Tell them about the power bands where the manufacturer has admitted that there's no evidence whatsoever that they work, and you can demonstrate the way that it's made to appear to have an effect. Help them use scientific thinking to feel smarter than their friends, instead of using it to make them feel stupid. Give them a positive experience with critical thinking, and the next time you come back to them to talk about this issue, you will have some common ground to start from. And it's a long-term process. It's not as satisfying as winning a debate, but it's more likely to change the way people actually think if they're truly dug in. Our strategic questions about those in the middle and who are more persuadable. To get people to do what you want them to do, you have to talk to them in terms of their own values and their own needs. It doesn't mean pandering to people's worst views and ideas. It means working with values we share. And you also have to look at the beliefs that they hold, which will be obstacles, things so you can figure out how to get past them. And I want to show just a few examples of some widely held values we can use to encourage reason and critical thinking. Honesty. People believe others should be honest and not mislead them. People believe others should not profit by breaking the rules. People believe that there is virtue in helping those that we care about and taking care of them. These are just a few examples. And here are some other things that people want, aspirations that they want for themselves that can be useful to us as skeptics. People want to feel smart and respected. People want to feel right and confident in their decisions, and people don't want to feel cheated or taken advantage of. When we frame things in terms of these shared values, it can go a long way toward making our point with the general public who don't consider themselves skeptic. If we don't play to these values and aspirations, it won't connect with the people we're talking to. We need to spell it out as well and not just assume that people see the value of what we're offering. On the flip side, these are some obstacles. There are needs and beliefs that act to stop people from listening to us at all. People need to feel in control. They want to have something that makes sense of an irrational and scary world for them. The fact that lightning can strike and you can die at any moment, you can lose your job and lose your health care and be on the street. It's hard to deal with that without some sort of understanding of who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side in the world, who's making the bad things happen. If you're going to take that from people, you need to offer them some understanding of the world that's a positive understanding of the world that helps them replace that. Next, people want to feel smart, right, and respected. This is an opportunity as well. Sometimes skeptics do things that make people feel dumb, wrong, and disrespected. And when we do that, people aren't in a place to listen. And we can make people feel this way with the words we choose, even if we're not intending to. Another obstacle is people's negative views about skeptics, that we're just against everything and not for everything, that we're narrow-minded, we back the establishment, we're tied to big pharma, whatever the mainstream consensus is, and that's not always right. And that we're elitists, we're arrogant, we think that we're smarter than everybody else, and we dismiss other people as stupid. These are the views that people may be inclined to hold against us when we first approach them. If we say, I'm a skeptic and I'd like to have a conversation with you. So I want to give an example. I want to illustrate this because we're living in a time when we're constantly bombarded with conflicting information and ideas. In order to make sense of this, in order to function, we have to instantly be able to sort things into whether or not we take them seriously or whether we don't. And everyone does this. We match new information with patterns we've seen before to figure out how we should interpret it. And how we think about a moral or ideological issue can be completely different based on what pattern we match that to. We have set ways of understanding the sides of an argument, the narratives, they're stories that we've learned from society that we fit new conflicts into. We call these narratives frames. So we have frames for talking about political conflicts, right? We have the little guy versus the establishment, the reformer versus beltway bureaucrats. We figure out when there's a race, like what's going on here, like which guy is on which side. We have frames for thinking about science, mainstream credible science versus cranks, groundbreaking science versus the naysayers who told the Wright brothers that we could never fly. And we have disturbing new findings versus a dismissive establishment, right? We've got the guy in Independence Day who's decoded the message from the aliens and knows they're going to attack, but no one will listen. And these are stories that we learn from society. And then we've got ways of thinking about economic issues, individual rights versus government authority, or corporate greed versus public good. Public service employees versus corporate lobbyists, or struggling taxpayers versus greedy public employees. These are stories that we tend to fit conflicts into these boxes. So the same person can come down on two very different sides of similar issues just because of the way the issues are framed, and it's why you don't want your ideas to be put in the wrong box. So for a second, think about the anti-vaccination movement and what box we get put in, or what box the pro-vaccine movement gets put in this debate. The frame the anti-vaxxers are presenting to people is that of scientists as tools of corporate interests, which is a real thing that people understand, because for years people heard that scientists told us tobacco doesn't cause cancer, and finally the public understanding of the science caught up to what everyone already knew. And there are scientists now doing research for oil companies saying there's no proof of global warming and global warming can't be proved. So it's this mistrust of corporate-driven science coupled with parents' fears about their children and feeling this huge responsibility to protect them that drives this anti-vaccination panic. And when pro-vaccination skeptics respond with the facts that vaccines are much safer than not vaccinating, what the public can hear is trust the scientists. They know better than you what's best for your children. And that's what people can hear. And as long as we're stuck in that frame with someone, we can't win with them because they put everything that we say into that box. And so we have to get out of that box to give people a different way to understand the conflict. It also matters who delivers the message. You will be dismissed if you're perceived to have a self-interested motivation in saying what you're saying. If you're a spokesperson talking about your protest and people perceive that you are associated with an economic interest in the outcome of the conflict, people won't trust what you're saying. People trust union workers much more than they trust union officials, for example. People trust consumers more than they trust a corporate spokesperson. Basically, people trust people with whom they feel they share common interests. And when people see you on TV, even if they don't know who you are, they'll look at your clothes, your age, your tone of voice, and a lot of other factors so they can try to decide if you're on their side or if you're on someone else's side. And it's not necessarily who you are or whose side you're on that matters. It matters what people perceive. It's the public perception. So with everything we say, we're telling others something about ourselves. When we talk about the other side, we're also talking about us. When we say that the people on the other side are stupid, we're saying that we're know-it-alls and that we think we're really smart. When we say that people are gullible and need to learn critical thinking because they'll believe anything, we're saying that we think we're better than smarter than everyone. And if you make fun of dumb hillbillies in the Bible Belt, what you're communicating to a lot of people is that you're an elitist, coastal, city-dwelling liberal who does not care about what life is like for the majority of people in the country. So with the words we choose and how we talk about an issue, we're not just talking about our ideas, but we're communicating who we are. And it's not what you say that matters, it's what people think they hear. To apply this to skepticism and critical thinking, we have to think about the language we use with each other and the attitudes we share, and examine whether those are things that help or hurt us when we talk to the general public. People's stereotypes of skeptics may not be fair, they may not be logical, but it doesn't matter. Perception is what matters when we're trying to persuade the public. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy around the right tone and the right words and the right approach that skeptics should use, so I want to be clear that I'm not saying we should be pushovers and not say anything mean. A lot of this is not about tone, it's about making sure that we are working with the values and the shared values of the persuadable people we want to persuade, instead of working against their values and against ourselves. When you speak to someone in the values they understand, you can take a much more aggressive tone and get away with it when they perceive that you're on their side. Whereas if you attack their values, you'll be written off and you may even push them the other way. What I would say is that there is a cost associated with arguing in a certain way, and we need to do the math on it for different situations. In political communications, when a candidate runs a negative campaign or a negative ad, there's a cost to that. A certain number of people are going to be put off by attack ads. It costs you votes to do attack ads. What you have to make sure when you do attack ads is that you're costing your opponent more votes than you're costing yourself. And that can work. But when you're going negative because it's the right decision for a specific situation, that's great. Just check to make sure your rationale makes sense. And if you want to reach other people, use the words that are most likely to reach them instead of the words that are the most satisfying to say, or the words that we're just most comfortable with, because we use them with each other. Because it's not what you say that's important, it's what people hear. So how do we make sure that they hear what we really mean? First, prepare what we want to say ahead of time. Write down the ways that we want to express each idea and express them that way every time. And then think twice about each word you're using. Once to think about what it means to you, and then twice to think about what it means to the people who aren't skeptics, who don't understand skepticism, don't consider themselves to be in our community, and aren't science literate. If those meanings do not match, consider using different words. If you want to be clear, the best way to have control over how the words are perceived is to say exactly what you mean. We often say we're here to educate the public about pseudoscientific nonsense or something like this. If we say we're here to help people defend themselves from pseudoscientific scams, we're giving people agency, we're helping you protect yourself. This is something, protect yourself and your family, while also putting the blame on the scammer and not on the person who believes it. If you want to go a step further with this, you can take out the jargon and say we want to defend people from scams that use scientific sounding language to mislead consumers, instead of talking about pseudoscience. If we want to say we want people to think critically, an alternative is to say that we want to inspire an investigative, truth-seeking spirit in others. We want people to understand that this is a gift. This is this amazing thing. If we want to go totally off the rails with it, we can tell people why science is awesome.